My name is Rachel Hartley, and I am 29 years old. And on a Wednesday morning in October, I sat in a probate courtroom watching my cousin Derek lean back in his chair with his arms crossed, while his attorney told the judge that I had coerced a dying woman into signing away her entire estate. And the reason I wasn't panicking, the reason I was sitting perfectly still with my hands folded on the table in front of me, was because I knew that in about 4 minutes my attorney was going to stand up and play a video that would end this lawsuit so brutally that Derek's lawyer would probably consider retiring. Let me take you back because you need to understand the difference between showing up for someone because you love them and showing up for someone because you want something. And my cousin spent 40 years proving they only knew how to do the second one. My Aunt Catherine was my mother's older sister, and she was the kind of woman who wore red lipstick to the grocery store and learned to use a smartphone at 72 because she refused to be left behind by the world, and she never had children of her own. But she had me, and she had my 3 cousins, Derek, Michelle, and Aaron, who were the children of her younger brother. I grew up 20 minutes away from Aunt Catherine, and I spent every Saturday at her house from the time I was 7 years old. We would bake cookies or work in her garden or sit on her porch, and she would tell me stories about her life and ask me about mine. And when I got older and life got complicated, she was the person I called when I needed to hear that I wasn't crazy. My cousins lived 4 hours away and visited maybe twice a year, always on major holidays, and always for less than 3 hours. And every single time they came, Derek would comment on the size of Aunt Catherine's house or mention how well her investments must be doing, and Aunt Catherine would smile tightly and change the subject. When I graduated college, Aunt Catherine gave me a necklace that had belonged to her mother, and she said, "Rachel, you're the one who stayed. You're the one who showed up, and I want you to have this." And I cried because I hadn't stayed for a reward. I stayed because I loved her. When Aunt Catherine was diagnosed with ovarian cancer at 76, I took a leave of absence from my job as a school counselor, and I moved into her guest room, and I drove her to every single chemotherapy appointment, and I sat with her when she was too nauseous to stand, and I organized her medications, and I learned how to help her bathe when she was too weak to do it herself. And I did all of this without asking my cousins for help because I already knew they wouldn't come. Derek called once during her treatment and asked how she was doing, and then spent 10 minutes talking about his new boat, and Michelle sent a card with a stock photo of a sunset, and the words "thinking of you" printed in cursive, and Aaron didn't call at all. Aunt Catherine lived for 2 more years after her diagnosis. And in that time, I watched her decide exactly what she wanted her legacy to be. And 6 months before she passed, she asked me to call her attorney, a man named Robert Greaves, who had handled her estate planning for 20 years. And when he came to the house, she told him she wanted to update her will. I wasn't in the room when she did it. I was in the kitchen making tea because she asked me to give her privacy. And when Robert came out 30 minutes later, he looked at me and said, "Your aunt is a very clear-minded woman." And he didn't say anything else. Aunt Catherine passed away on a Sunday morning in May, and I was holding her hand, and the last thing she said to me was, "You made these years bearable. Rachel, don't let anyone tell you otherwise," and I promised her I wouldn't. The funeral was small, and my cousins showed up in black clothing they had clearly bought that morning, and Derek gave a eulogy about how much Aunt Catherine meant to the family, and how she was always so generous, and I sat in the front row and said nothing because I was too tired to be angry. The will reading happened 1 week later in Robert Greaves's office, and my cousins showed up looking relaxed like they were about to hear good news. And when Robert opened the document and read aloud that Catherine had left her entire estate to me, including her home, her investment portfolio, and all financial assets valued at approximately $2.8 million, the room went completely silent. Derek said, "That's not possible." And Robert said, "It's very possible this will was updated 6 months ago, witnessed by 2 independent parties, and your aunt was fully competent at the time of signing." Michelle started crying and said, "This isn't fair. Rachel already had her." She meant my mother, who had passed away 3 years earlier, as if my grief was a resource I had used up, and Aaron just stared at me like I had stolen something from him. I said Aunt Catherine made her own choices, and Derek stood up and said, "We'll contest this," and then he walked out. 2 weeks later, I was served with a lawsuit filed by all 3 of my cousins claiming undue influence, elder abuse, and mental incapacity. And their attorney was a man named Philip Kress, who had a reputation for being aggressive and expensive, and I knew this was going to get ugly. Robert Greaves told me not to worry. He said, "Rachel, your aunt prepared for this possibility," and I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You'll see." The court hearing was set for 4 months later, and in that time my cousins told everyone who would listen that I had manipulated a sick old woman, that I had isolated her from her family, and that I had stolen their inheritance, and I heard all of it through mutual friends and distant relatives who called me, asking if it was true, and I stopped answering my phone. The day of the hearing, I wore a gray suit, and I sat next to Robert at a table on the left side of the courtroom, and my cousin sat on the right side with their attorney, and Derek kept looking at me with this smug expression like he had already won. Philip Kress opened by painting me as an opportunistic niece who had taken advantage of a vulnerable woman, and he brought up the fact that I had moved into Aunt Catherine's home during her illness, and he made it sound predatory like I had done it to control her, and he said, "Your Honor, the facts are clear. This will was changed under suspicious circumstances while my client's aunt was undergoing cancer treatment and suffering from the effects of chemotherapy, which we know can cause cognitive impairment." Robert stood up and said, "Your Honor, I have evidence that directly contradicts every claim made by the petitioners," and the judge said, "Proceed." Robert pulled out a laptop and set it on the table and said, 6 months before her passing, Catherine recorded a video statement in my office with 2 witnesses present. She did this specifically because she anticipated this lawsuit and she wanted to make her intentions unmistakably clear. And he turned the screen toward the judge and pressed play. Aunt Catherine's face filled the screen, and she was sitting in Robert's office wearing a blue cardigan I recognized. And she looked directly into the camera and said, "My name is Catherine Louise Pembroke. I am 78 years old. I am of sound mind, and I am making this statement of my own free will without coercion or influence from anyone. And I want to be very clear about why I am leaving my entire estate to my niece Rachel Hartley." She paused, and then she said, "I have 3 nephews and nieces through my brother, and I have loved them as family. But love does not obligate me to reward absence. And for the last 40 years, Derek, Michelle, and Aaron have treated me like a holiday. Obligation. They visit twice a year, they call on my birthday, and they have never once asked me how I'm actually doing. Rachel, on the other hand, has been a constant presence in my life since she was a child. She showed up every week. She called to check on me. She sat with me during the hardest months of my life, and she did all of this without asking for anything in return. And I am leaving her everything, because she earned it not through manipulation, but through love." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear someone breathing in the row behind me, and Aunt Catherine kept talking. She said, "I know my nephews and nieces will contest this. Well, I know they will hire attorneys and claim I was not in my right mind. So, let me be clear, I have been evaluated by my physician, Dr. Alan Marsh, who will testify that I have full cognitive capacity. I have updated this will with my attorney of 20 years, who will confirm I understood every word, and I am making this video so that when they stand in front of a judge and accuse Rachel of stealing from me, the judge can hear directly from me that they are lying." She looked into the camera for a long moment, and then she said, "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And it means my nephews and nieces cared more about my money than they ever cared about me and Rachel. I hope you use this money to build a beautiful life. You deserve every bit of it." The video ended, and Robert closed the laptop, and the judge looked at Philip Kress and said, "Does your client wish to present any evidence that contradicts this statement?" And Philip said nothing. He just shook his head and started packing his briefcase. The judge said, based on the video testimony, the medical evaluation, and the witnessed signing of the will, I find no evidence of undue influence or incapacity. This will is valid, and this case is dismissed, and he hit the gavel once and it was over. Derek didn't look at me. Michelle was crying again, but this time it looked real, and Aaron walked out without saying a word, and I sat very still and felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt relief. Robert put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your aunt knew exactly what she was doing," and I nodded because I couldn't speak yet. I sold Aunt Catherine's house 6 months later because living there without her felt wrong. And I used part of the money to pay off my student loans, and I put the rest into a trust that funds scholarships for kids who want to become counselors, because Aunt Catherine always said the people who care for others should be supported, not starved, and I visit her grave every month, and I tell her what I'm doing with the life she helped me build. My cousins haven't spoken to me since the hearing. And I'm fine with that, because I learned a long time ago that family is not defined by blood, it's defined by presence, and they were never present, not when it mattered. If you're the person who showed up when everyone else was busy, if you're the one who stayed when it was hard and thankless and lonely, I need you to know that your presence mattered even if no one said thank you out loud. And if someone tries to rewrite history and take credit for your love, don't let them, because the people who actually know the truth will always know, and that's the only audience that matters.